My name is David. I serve as our discipleship pastor here at Graceland. That who you saw up there was Nate Milliken. He serves as our lead pastor at Graceland. He's supposed to be up here right now, but he looks like, if you could see a picture of him, his face this morning, it looks like somebody stuck a pillowcase over his head, threw some bees up in there, and then hit him a few times with a sock full of batteries, okay? And that's about what his face looks like right now. And all of that happened aside from the sock full of batteries part. So yesterday he got stung by some bees on the face, and both eyes are swollen shut. He looks like Hitch, in the movie Hitch when he eats the shellfish, okay? In the event, first service, I heard some, like some sympathy. I want to say just let's temper that, because it wasn't like he was minding his own business. He has a bee suit, first of all, that he's supposed to wear when he mows the grass around the beehive that he put on his own property, okay? So I'm not saying he had it coming. I'm just saying, you can reach out to him and be thankful. I do have a photo of his face taken this morning, and we're gonna bid that off. And the highest bidder, all the money's gonna go to Choice's offering to buy car seats and pack and play. So if you wanna get in on this, it's starting at just one Bitcoin, okay? One Bitcoin. I don't know what that's worth, but it's kind of fluctuating. So we'll bid that off, raise some money for Choices. A few weeks ago, my wife and I, it was a Friday night a few weeks ago, and the kids were asleep, put the kids down, and we were like, okay, let's watch a movie tonight. And so we were looking through one of our different streaming services and deciding between two different movies. The movie we settled on was a movie, maybe you've seen it, it's starring Michael Keaton, and it's a movie called Worth. Worth is the name of the movie, and it's about immediately what happened after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, where 2,977 people were murdered, okay? 2,977 people were murdered, and Michael Keaton's character, Kevin Feinberg, had the impossible task, but one that he had to make possible, of ascribing value to each of those 2,977 people. He had to answer the question, what is their life worth? And he had to put a dollar amount to that question. I asked you the same question as I was watching that movie. I thought to myself the same thing. How would I figure this out? How would I take a dollar amount and put it onto a person? I'm ascribing worth when I do that, right? I'm ascribing value to a person. He had that difficult challenge. As I watched it, I thought, do you give more money? Is a person worth more because they have dependents? Are they worth more because they're married? Are they worth more because of the income they made at the time or the job they had? Is it right? Is it fair for one family to receive less money because their dad was a window washer than somebody else's family whose dad was a CEO? Like, is that fair? Are they not of equal worth? I bring this question up to us, this movie. I commend it to you. It's certainly a good movie to watch. It's happened, real situation, not hypothetical, because we're looking at the 6th and 8th commandment today. We're looking at the 10 commandments this summer, walking through them, and looking at them through the eyes of people who followed Jesus, who would be under the New Testament covenant, the new covenant. How do we look at the old covenant and these 10 laws, of which are scripture and which are authoritative in our life? And I think when you look at the 6th commandment, thou shalt not murder, do not murder, and the 8th commandment, do not steal, what it's gonna help us do is it's gonna help us see a gap. Now, this gap exists in every Christian's life. If you're not a Christian, or you've thought before, Christians are a bunch of hypocrites, you're absolutely right, okay? Every person is a hypocrite because every person fails to perfectly line up their espouse, their spoken beliefs, and their lived out beliefs. There is nobody but Jesus Christ who says one thing and always lives it out perfectly. All of us have this gap between what we say we think and believe and what we actually live. Now, our goal, our hope as Christians, what we do is we try to lessen that gap as best we can, don't we? We want our spoken theology to match up closer and closer with our lived out theology. And by looking at the 6th and 8th commandment today, I think we're gonna see just where that gap is and how we can bring them a little bit closer. Okay, so let's read Exodus 20, verses 1 through 2, which is the start, and then we'll read the 6th and 8th commandment. You've probably heard these before. Verses 1 and 2, and God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And he gives 10 commandments, 2 of which are, you shall not murder, you shall not steal. February 20th, 2019, at 3:30 Eastern time, but 12:30 Mountain time, my wife and I were inside a very dark room, and we had an ultrasound, a 20-week ultrasound. And we had the ultrasound done. We'd done this once before with our firstborn son. So we know what to expect after the ultrasound happens. The doctor comes in and, talks to you a little bit about what they saw. But when a team of doctors walked in after this one, we knew something was wrong. We learned that at 20 weeks that our second child, our daughter, had some abnormalities with her brain that were going to impact her life. To what degree, nobody could tell us. But there in the ultrasound room, we were given an alternative. We were given the alternative that we could end the pregnancy or we could keep going. Because she has a part of her brain missing, in other words, her life isn't as valuable as somebody else's. It would be acceptable in the eyes of some to murder her because she has something different about her. What is a life worth? I've raised that question, and I bring in this situation into a commandment about murder and theft, not so much because of Roe versus Wade and all that. I'm really fine to not necessarily avoid it, but when you talk about murder and you talk about stealing, what has to happen first in my heart is I have to do one of two things, maybe both. I have to either elevate my worth above somebody else's, or I have to devalue somebody so that they're worth less than me, perhaps both at the same time. You can't murder somebody unless you've done that first in your heart. And Jesus will go on to say that you have heard it said, do not murder, but I tell you, if you are angry in your heart, if you call somebody fool, you have murdered them. You have committed murder in your heart. Jesus tells us that murder begins in the heart. And so we see it comes around this question of what is a life worth? And how do we ascribe value to one person's life? The Bible defines murder as the unlawful taking of life by human intention. Okay, each of those words are important. The word unlawful, when I say the word unlawful taking of life, I mean it as the Bible defines it. Because that can be defined a lot of different ways depending on the country or state you're in, can't it be? Some places we would say that murder, what the Bible calls murder, is actually lawful. The lawful taking of life by evil human intention. The commandment is do not murder. It is not do not kill. And if you like to read the King James Version, the King James Bible says thou shalt not kill. But it's not thou shalt not kill. If murder and killing were synonymous, then every soldier in every war would be brought to trial for murder, wouldn't they? Anybody who's ever defended themselves and that's ended in somebody else's loss of life would be on trial for murder. They would have committed murder. That's because murder and killing are different. They are different. Let's just explain again the different. The Hebrew word, so the Bible is always consistent with itself. So it's had 40 authors, over 66 books. But even though Moses uses this word here when he writes Exodus, the particular Hebrew word for murder. And even though later in the Old Testament, different authors will talk about murder and they use the same word, you don't find a contradiction, meaning the word for murder that's used here in this sixth commandment is never used to talk about when somebody is killed in war. It's a different word because we're talking about something different. It's never used when it's talked about capital punishment because capital punishment is not murder, the unlawful taking of human life with evil intention. It's also not used for self-defense situations. So killing and murder are different, okay? So I want to make that clear. Killing and murder are different, and murder begins in the heart, Jesus says. Stealing begins in the heart of a person. And we just took up an offering for choices to buy 100 car seats, 100 pack and plays. Church, this is always going to be a good thing. It's always going to be a good thing to care for people in vulnerable situations. Moms who may not have, who need extra help, small children who are going to be born in a post-Roe era. This is always a good thing. I have no but. It's also kind of complicated. It depends. It is always a good thing. It's always going to be a good thing for us. I think, rather simple in that regard. So I don't want to say although or while, but I do want us to look holistically and not neglect some people and only focus on one area. And as you know, I'm particularly personally passionate about what we do with people in the womb, my daughter being one of them. Our money and our actions should, though, extend to include any person who is potentially a target of murder, any person who is potentially a target of their life being considered less valuable and less worth because of something about them. Okay, because that's, again, the heart of murder. That has to happen in your heart before that's possible. You have to remove value from a person. And we should be concerned about that with preborn, new babies, and all the way through, okay? Now in Iceland, this is a few years ago, I remember they said they've successfully eliminated Down syndrome from their population. Now the headline says that, they tout it, it's something to celebrate, but when you simply just read the first paragraph, you realize they've eliminated it because they've aborted every child who's received a Down syndrome diagnosis. And that's how they've eliminated it, by murdering every child in the womb who has Down syndrome. Because, again, they have something different about them, and so they're of less worth. They don't need to be protected. And even if it's not because of them, but because of an inconvenience or the increased workload on a person, they're then of less worth, less need of protection. We don't need to protect them. I grew up in the Northwest, and so Dr. Kevorkian is a name I know from a young age. He's the first person to do physician assistant suicide. I talked last week about adultery and how we take words that are like not nice sounding, like adultery, and we try to bathe it in our English language and say things like open marriage or married dating to make it sound a little more positive, and the same thing with euthanasia. Physician-assisted suicide. There's all sorts of new terms that would try to make something that's the taking of life, even voluntarily, and make it sound like a positive thing, like it's okay. It's legal in 8 states in our country, generally illegal throughout the world. But just on the other end of the spectrum, we've talked about preborn, now we've talked about end of life. I do think, I'm not ignorant. I know that Roe versus Wade was struck down. I'm not ignorant. I know the geographical area in which I live tends to be, whether churched or unchurched, more pro-life. I'm not ignorant of those things. I'm also not ignorant that I belong to a church and part of a church and believe myself that abortion is wrong, okay? I don't particularly, not big into talking about politics necessarily, but I do want to say something to us, given those realities, that with our passion to see the end of murder for unborn babies, with that passion, with that desire in this area, we must not also simultaneously commit murder in our hearts by hating people who think differently and believe differently. Okay, so when you call somebody an idiot in your heart because they write something on Facebook, or you think, I can't, they're so dumb, I can't, how do they even think that? Okay, you've committed murder. You've taken that person's value and said because they believe something different, they are of less importance, they're of less worth. They are worthy of me calling them a fool or an idiot. Okay, so we actually commit murder in our attempt to defend and stop murder. All right, we must not do that. Jesus says murder begins in the heart. So I commend that to us, that as we're passionate about this subject, let's not simultaneously become the thing that we hate. Martin Luther, Jesus expands the definition of murder. You know, we talked about Martin Luther says this: murder is when we have the opportunity to do good to our neighbors and to prevent, protect, and save them from suffering bodily harm or injury, but fail to do so. So murder is not just the taking, unlawful taking of life. It's when we have the opportunity to do good to our neighbors, to prevent and protect them and save them from suffering bodily harm or injury, but we fail to do so. So now I'm going to move to more of a corporate question for us to think about here as a local church. Who around you is vulnerable? Okay, I didn't say who did you murder, okay? That's an easy question for most of us, right? Who around you is vulnerable and needs to be protected or saved from harm? Who is vulnerable around you needs to be saved or protected from harm? Whose worth is more likely to be diminished because of something about them? Whose life is more likely to be considered as of less value for one reason or another? That's who needs protecting from murder. That's who needs protection from the unlawful taking advantage of them. And as Christians, we get to be in a position to do something about that. The oldest of us, that's true of. The youngest of us, we've talked about plenty, that's true of us. Those without parents who are around in a foster care system, they didn't choose that. Wasn't like they did something. Those who are mentally or physically handicapped, again, we sometimes say, well, they deserved it. Not that population, but of people. Well, you know, they deserved it. They ran the red light. They didn't stop. They did this. They did that. What do you think? What do you expect? We're talking about people who didn't deserve to be in a vulnerable position. We're talking about people who don't deserve to have their life of less worth, as if anybody did. But they simply live and exist, but they are of more likelihood of harm. Who are those people? So our primary way, I think, that we obey this commandment is just not by just abstaining from murder and abstaining from stealing. Okay, because murder and theft actually first, again, begins in our hearts at ascribing worth or removing worth or adding worth to our life so that there's an inequality of somebody's more valuable than somebody else. That's where it begins. Then we can approach this in a positive way too, not just by abstaining from murder, but by advocating through our actions for those who are in great need of all ages. Okay, we can choose to look at people the same way Jesus looks at people and say, whether she's the woman at the well who's got five failed marriages, whether it's the Pharisee who's self-righteous, whether it's my disciple John, my beloved disciple, whether it's a Jew, whether it's a Gentile, a centurion, a leper, all of them are of equal value and equal worth. I see them all the same. This is Jesus. And we can move towards that same perspective, to look at people regardless of age, age, ability, criminal record or not, and look at them and decide what they've done, what they were born with, who they are. They're of equal worth in God's eyes because they're made in His image. There is some similarities and distinctions. We looked at with adultery last week. The prohibition, do not commit adultery, we said if you weren't here, it's not new. Like, it's not new to Israel during this time. Plenty of other societies and countries had similar laws against adultery. And the same thing is true with murder and stealing. There was not a country that said, well, murder is okay sometimes, like the purge. Like, on one day a week, you can murder people, and it's okay. That doesn't exist. It's only in movies where any country says murder is allowable, okay? So this is not like a new ethic. This is not like revolutionary for the people at the time. Hey, if something doesn't belong to you, you're not allowed to take it as if it does, right? That's not new, okay? So this wasn't the first time Israel had heard this, just like adultery, but again, there is a distinction here. When you look at the ancient Near Eastern and other cultures, their law codes, what you notice about, for instance, theft, is that they confuse stuff with people. And this is something God does not do. God does not confuse stuff with people. For instance, a person punishment for stealing, it depended on a number of factors. All of those factors based upon the question of worth. So, if you were a male and you stole something, your punishment would be different than if you were a female and stole something. Why? Because of worth. The thing you stole would change your punishment. Why? Because of the thing's worth would change the punishment. The person you stole from would change your punishment. If they're of high social status, they were of more worth. And so your punishment would be greater from stealing from somebody who's of more value than if you stole from a peasant. Your punishment would be significantly less. Why? Because they are of lesser worth. God does not confuse people and stuff. The punishment for stealing in the Old Testament was never death. Was never death. Okay? So we want to see that God gets it right when he doesn't elevate stuff to a level of people, nor does he change a person's value and worthiness based upon something that they have no control over, or even something that they've done themselves, whether they have money or a great job or no money or no job. They're worthy just the same. I'm going to give us a few handles, okay? So again, I had 90 minutes to think about these handles, okay, in total. Really probably not much, but I think maybe in that way they'll be a little bit more practical, okay? Less thought exercises and more, I think, scalable, something that can actually be done. It's not going to take a 10-foot leap for you or for me to do something. Again, the goal being, this is what we believe. We believe all of life is valuable from the moment of conception to the moment of death. Okay, we believe that. Okay, and then again, we have our lived beliefs, which again, we have to own. They're not perfect. If they're perfect, then you're saying you're Christ. Okay, so none of us are making that statement that these are perfectly lined. So I tried to give us 4 different handles that we can kind of close that gap and that address, birth to death. Okay, so as a church that our ethics collectively would look more like the kingdom ethics of Jesus and less like the ethics of this world, whether it be Republican and political, or whether it just be conservative, whether it just be Southern hospitality, okay? That our ethics would be embodied of Jesus' ethics, not something else that's just true of this world, which is perishing. So when I say the kingdom, I mean the world that is to come. The world of the future, not like life on Mars, Tesla, Elon Musk futuristic, like the real world of the future that will be here. That world is coming. And so these are 4 different ways that we can make the world of today look like the world of the future that will come when Jesus returns. From youngest to oldest, you can give to that choices offering. That's something I think anybody can do, whether it's even just $1 or $5. We can all give something to provide car seats and pack and plays for babies that are going to be born in a post-Roe era. I think that's a simple one. I think also, not maybe in addition to that, we can redirect some time and relational energy. I don't know your life stage. I don't know what time you have or don't have. But if you have time, and not just available, but maybe redirecting that to a child who is in a vulnerable situation. I'm specifically thinking about typically kids in foster care, okay? And so, for instance, John Pierce, one of our pastors, he is a court-appointed special advocate. So he is the advocate for a child who's moving through a foster care system, okay? I know John's schedule a little bit because I work with the man, and he's a busy guy. He does a lot of care, but he's redirected some of that time and energy. Okay, so maybe that's something available to you. We have another gentleman who's been a big brother, and his little brother has just turned 18. He's been walking with him for a very long time. Okay, so kids without parents. Kids without parents. There's a lot of different ways. So maybe you say, I'm going to redirect some time and energy to that. Undoubtedly, maybe a little bit seemingly bigger commitment than giving. But maybe for you, you say, yeah, I think that's something I've been thinking about. Another thing you can do, and I have less on this right now, but you can serve alongside and befriend and be with a person who has disabilities or other special needs. Okay, so my plan was to talk about this like in 6 months to a year, okay? But, Nate got stung by some bees and hit in the face, it looks like. So here we are. So I'm at least, as we talk about the worth of a person, again, in front of me every day is my daughter. In front of me every day is my daughter. She produces nothing for the world, by the world's standards, okay? She does produce something. She doesn't create she's not gonna generate an income. She's not gonna lead, again, according to the word. She's not gonna be on a stage. She's not gonna have special titles. To most people, she'll never be known. Okay, nothing's gonna be written about her in the world's history books, which I guess is true of pretty much all of us too. Okay, but in the kingdom, the world that is to come, her and others are actually the people of honor. They're the VIPs in the world that is to come because God's kingdom is upside down. And you see this in plenty of Jesus's words and parables, but in Luke 14, you see that it's not the people of position and honor, of wealth and of status who are first and greatest in the kingdom. It's the poor, the lame, the blind, the lepers. Those are the people that get invited to the banquet. Those are the people that Jesus gives the seats of honor to. And so, obviously a little personal for me, my heart would be that our church looks less like a Gap commercial, not to say it does, but it would be less like the advertising of the world and less like the ethics of the world and more like the ethics of the kingdom. That we wouldn't look at people and ascribe worth and value because of what they can do for us, how great their speaking ability is, their charisma, their personality, but we would see the things that Jesus sees. And we would begin to look at value in a person's life the way that God sees it. That's gonna take a work of God in us. But I believe that our church can become more like the world of the future and less like the world that is present. If you have a desire for that, even just to talk about whether you're organizationally gifted or personally want to be involved in that, you can text this number. I will respond to you, 812-432-2234. Like the Avengers, I'm forming a team, okay? I'm forming a team. And I've got a little bit going on it, but I'm trying to get some people together as I'm made aware, different people who have experience in this or just want to be a part of it some way, somehow, so that we can begin to ascribe properly value to people. My daughter, for instance, anybody with a disability, mental, physical, whatever, here's one thing they don't need. They don't need any of our pity. They don't need us to look at them and say, oh, I feel my heart breaks for you. Like they don't need pity. They don't need sympathy, okay? My daughter is quite happy and joyful. She doesn't need me to say, oh, I feel so bad for you because you don't have all the great things that I have. You know, my daughter and all the other people I've friends with, I think, from the past, you know what they've never done? They've never gossiped about anybody. They've never looked at somebody and compared themselves to them and thought more highly of themselves or less of that person because of something. They've never made threats to that person, right? Not lied to them, right? Never said, well, because you look this way, I'm just probably not going to be friends with you. Okay, so again, if you're interested in something like that, again, my heart would be for Graceland to look more like the kingdom, the world that is to come, and less like the kingdom of this earth, okay? That's gonna mean That's going to be most seen in how we treat people and what we do with people that the world doesn't value. How do we treat people? What do we do with people that the world doesn't value? Lastly, consider becoming a leading servant. A leading servant is another term I use for deacon. We have, I know, 5 widows in the church as of today. I think at our deacon gathering this week that'll be handled. But we have 5 widows in our church who don't have somebody they connect with. One of the things I love about Graceland is every widow in the church gets assigned a deacon. I was just overnight with my grandmother in Oregon, 94 years old. My grandfather's funeral was 3 weeks ago, and I stayed the weekend in her house with her. And it became, obviously I put flesh on it, became a little more real. What I was thankful for is that she's part of a church that values her, not based upon what she can do for them, not based upon the agenda she can move forward or how much she gives. They value her because she's a person made in God's image. And they want to care for particularly those who are most vulnerable. There are lots of people, many that you and I don't ever see on a Sunday because they can't come. They don't come. They don't have a loud personality. They're not asking for anything, but they're lonely, and they could use some friendship. So maybe that's a way that you say, I'm going to redirect some time and energy to spend some time with someone. Spend some time with someone who's lonely because they matter too. And I may not be moving my agenda along, but is this person worth? Is this person worth it? Do they have the same value? Israel, spoiler alert, they failed to do this. They treated the foreigner with contempt. They took their babies and they sacrificed them to false gods. They walked over and trampled those with disabilities. This is what Israel did. But then the true and better Israel came, Jesus. And those who the world, including his own people, treated with contempt and devalued, he uplifted. I pray that we would look more and more like him. Not like Israel, not like the United States, not like the Midwest, not like any particular group of people. I pray and hope that we could look more and more like him, Jesus, the true and better Israel. He fulfilled the law perfectly, and he's made a way so that we can have a right relationship with him. I'm going to pray. We're going to sing in response to that truth. But again, my prayer, my hope, God has given us a mission. I pray that our stated belief and our lived belief would evermore draw closer and closer to greater alignment, where we could be like Christ. Let me pray. Father, I pray for our church family this morning, that we would be a city on a hill, that we would be a light in dark around us, that we would exemplify more and more the kingdom, the world that is to come, the world of the future, and we would look less and less like the world that is. God, first and foremost, we ask that you would root out in our hearts the places, the ways in which we look at somebody and we say, less worth. That we would root out the ways in our life that we elevate our own value above somebody else. And I pray that you would give us the eyes as we read your word, that you would give us the eyes, the lens through which to see, that we could look at the least of these and see them as the greatest of these. God, would you help us to be able to firmly not only say we believe what is life worth, it's invaluable, but that we would be able to live that way. Help us to redirect our time, energy, focus, our hearts. God, this is a great work that only you can do. I pray, though, for Graceland, our church, that it would become ever more this way. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.